Well, good afternoon. A couple of things to talk about before we get started. You'll notice in my background, there's the picture of me interviewing Tim at the conference. Unfortunately, due to technical issues, that recording was lost. So we're about to ask the very same questions and do the very same things. But there's one extra that I have to add in today that I couldn't have used last time, and that is good morning, Grandpa. Anything to tell us? Anything new?
Oh, thanks, Sam. Yeah, my wife and I found out just about an hour ago that we are the for the eighth time grandparents. This time for a little boy, Sawyer Francis Granda is his name. And right after we're through with this interview, we're going to be heading out to the hospital to go see him for the
Okay.
first time.
Well,
Yeah,
happy birthday, Sawyer.
thank
Okay.
you. Yeah.
Uh, just a couple more things. I think everybody knows that we have a long history, and I'm not going to talk too much about that because my wife just told me it's all about Tim, not about you. So keep it that way.
Yeah.
And I really want to thank you. And we're going to do the exact same questions that we did that night. And that night, everyone that came to the event got to see you coming in virtually, as we can see here, and me talking right in front of them at the table. And all that worked well. Okay, so I will now stop talking and turn it over to you. And Tim, here we go. Speaker.
Okay.
And we've already had one what's new with you. And the
All
other
right.
question here is what's new with you besides being a
Okay. Well,
grandpa? Congratulations.
yeah, the grandpa stuff is pretty darn important, but I do want to mention that you and I go back a number of years, maybe a dozen or so years. Came out to St. Louis to talk to the local reading council, and I believe you were the president at the time. And
And we
our
totally
friendship,
appreciated that. Totally
uh,
appreciated that.
our friendship has just uh, blossomed ever since. And I want to say how much I appreciate you being an advocate for looking at reading instruction from all sides. That nobody has the complete answer. And we have to take what we can get from everybody who thinks about reading instruction thoughtfully and scientifically, and I might also add artfully. So, my thanks to you for keeping our nose to the grind wheel when it comes to that here. As far as what's new for me, besides being a grandparent, been doing some writing lately. I've retired from Kent State University a couple years ago, but I haven't stopped writing or doing research. About a year ago, we published a new book called The Fluency Development Lesson. And I think I'll be talking about it more in a little while, but also our other speaker will be speaking about it as well. And it's just an intervention program that really does work. So I don't want to talk too much about it right now. The other thing is I came out with a new book with a colleague of mine, Melissa Cheeseman Smith and Savannah Campbell. It's called the Mega Book of Vocabulary. And many of the folks out there know that I wrote the Mega Book of Fluency. Well, this is the same idea. It's a collection of science-based and artful strategies for building students' knowledge and interest in words. So that one just came out 1st of April. So it's brand new. And if you get a chance to take a look at it, might be a good book for some summer reading. So
Okay,
as you can
I
see, I've
want to
been
put
pretty
a
busy.
oh, I want to put a quick plug in for the blog. What will happen now is everything you just mentioned, there will be links to them all. So all your books, and most especially for those that aren't aware of it, the art and science of you're the inventor of that term, art and science of reading, and I got to see that term invented back way back when.
Yeah.
All the books that you mentioned today, there will be links to them in the written
Oh,
part.
great.
And take back over.
Okay. Thank you much. Always appreciate the call outs so I don't have to make them myself. But yeah, the artfully teaching the science of reading. I might as well just say it while we're out here. We're actually working on a second edition of that one right now
Wow.
here. Yeah, but yeah, things are busy, just like for you. And as I've often said, we're not going to be losing our job anytime soon when it comes to teaching kids to read. It's an ongoing process here. But one of the things that, I really do like to talk about is reading fluency. Some people have called me the reading fluency guru. I'm not sure exactly
Properly so,
what that
properly
means,
so.
but it's something I developed interest in a long, long time ago. In fact, it actually began with an article written by Richard Allington, 1983, Fluency, the Neglected Goal of the Reading Program, or the Neglected Reading Goal. And what he said, what now 40 some years ago, was that fluency is pretty important. All we have to do is listen to kids read for a minute or so, and we can tell whether or not fluency is they're fluent readers or not. But he ended with the next question was, what do we do about it? And back then, the answer was not much. And more and more, we're learning that we should be doing more about reading fluency, and we are making progress, but it's still this tension between, in my own opinion, between phonics and reading fluency. I think phonics is incredibly important, but we can't leave out fluency. Otherwise, we're going to uh, uh, let out some of the oxygen in the room. We need to make fluency part of that. Now, one of the problems with that is with fluency, is this misunderstanding part is that it's often associated with fast reading. We all know that you can check one aspect of fluency, automaticity, by speed of reading. But that doesn't mean we teach kids to become fluent readers by checking how fast they read and encouraging them to read faster and faster. We want kids to develop fast readers reading the way you and I did as young kids, which was what we read a lot. So it's the idea of practice there, and the other part is oral reading too. When we think of fluency, we think, well, that's oral reading because that's how we measure it, right? Listening to kids read, and indeed that's true. But the way we read orally reflects the way we read silently as well. In fact, we have that inner voice we often listen to when we read. And we want to make sure that that is available for our students when they read silently, that they hear that internal voice, that prosodic voice that is linked to meaning. So it's been misunderstood, but it's incredibly important. Our research tells us that um, so many kids who struggle in reading have difficulty with reading fluency, even above and beyond what we'd attribute to phonics problems with phonics. In fact, Sheila Valencia and Marcia Bully did some work a few years back where they looked at students who, third and fourth graders, who perform poorly on these state mandated reading tests. No matter what state or province we live in, we have these end of the year tests, right, that check kids' comprehension. Well, what they found was that between 75 to 90% of these kids who struggle with these tests exhibit problems with phonics and reading fluency. So again, it's not one or the other, it's both. But if we only work on one, we're going to be disappointed with the results that we get. We need to make fluency just as important as phonics in our reading programs.
Okay, the before you get into, I hope you will be telling us about some of the instructional tools
Yeah.
for teaching fluency. But before you get into that, um, I want to make sure my readers are straight on the term prosody versus and what that means. And is prosody something you can measure? And does it have an impact on reading?
Great question. In fact, let me back up and talk about the two subcomponents of reading fluency, automaticity and prosody. First of all, automaticity is that ability to recognize words automatically or effortlessly. And I think you and I and anybody listening to this podcast are the best examples of automaticity. How often do we have to stop and sound out a word when we read it? They're automatically read. And the significance of that is that we can use our limited amount of cognitive energy or resources not to decode words but to try to make meaning out of the text that we're reading. So we want to become automatic at that, and again we do that with lots and lots of practice. The other one is prosody, and that's a linguistic term, and what the way I like to express it is expressive reading. If I think of somebody who's a fluent reader or somebody who's a fluent speaker, It's not somebody who talks fast or reads fast. It's somebody who uses their voice to make meaning. They get loud and soft and fast and slow. They have dramatic pauses. They change their voice when they become a different character if they're reading a novel. And that's the part of fluency that actually connects to comprehension. When you're reading with appropriate prosody or expression, you're actually giving evidence that you're understanding what it is that you're meaning because you're making your voice reflect the meaning of the text itself. So you can actually see where fluency is often been called that bridge between word recognition and comprehension. It's connected to phonics or word recognition by that automaticity component. We want to get kids past, sounding out words word by word to that automatic recognition that we all have. And then the prosody or expressive part, that's the connection to comprehension. When you can read with that expression, you're reflecting the meaning of the text there and giving evidence of comprehension. So it truly is a metaphorical bridge between those two aspects, phonics and comprehension.
Okay,
And if you don't
that
cross the bridge, you're not going to make it to comprehension.
right. And some of the things that happen when you do that are just amazing. Um, uh, well, can you tell us about your main instructional tool uh, um, for
Sure.
teaching reading fluency and the fact that reading fluency can be taught? Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, it can be taught. It can be, I often say it's practice, but it's intentional practice, practice that is planned out by a creative, meaningful, informed scientific teacher here. So let me share with you what I consider the five basic tools for instruction and reading fluency. The first is an easy one. It's called modeling fluent reading for your students, which is read aloud. When we read aloud to our kids, they're hearing fluent reading, and that's why it's so important that we as teachers, when we read to our students, we got to make sure that we read in that prosodic voice, that expressive voice. Almost in some cases, overemphasize and be a bit more dramatic than we might otherwise be here. And what we're providing students with is a what I would call metacognitive model of what fluent reading is all about. What I'd like to do sometimes with students is read in a not so fluent way, in that word by word manner, or what we call NASCAR reading as fast as we can. And you'll get those looks from kids like, "What are you doing?" And you say, "Well, are you understanding it? Are you enjoying it?" And of course, the answer they will have is not so much. And of course, the message to them is that when they read themselves, they have to read with expression and prosody and fluency. The problem with modeling or read aloud, by the way, read aloud does so many things for kids, builds vocabulary, comprehension, enthusiasm for reading. But the problem with it when it comes to fluency is you're doing the reading and they're not. So the next tool, there's five of them, is uh, assisted reading. That's where the students are reading, but they're provided with assistance of a more fluent reader. And that can take a number of forms. It could be reading with a partner who is more fluent than you are, and that partner could be a parent, a teacher, an older student of your own age, as long as they're a more fluent reading. And the idea is that we read together, not I read a line, you read a line. We read out loud together. And the research, especially by Keith Topping, has been particularly provocative and interesting. What he found is that kids who would do this assisted reading, he called it paired reading, with their parents for 10 minutes a day would accelerate their progress in reading by a factor of two or three. So, kids who were previously making, say, 2.5 months progress for a month's worth of school would now be making 1 to 1.5 months progress for a month's worth of school when you add in the paired reading. But assisted reading could be choral reading, or I might say choral singing of a song, as long as the words are in front of you. And we know the value of that, especially in the elementary grades, but even beyond into the middle grades as well. That notion of choral reading develops that sense of community in the classroom. And the kids who are not the good readers, like myself, I'm being assisted by my classmates who are the better readers when we read something together. And eventually I'll get to the point where I'll be able to read it, whatever that text is, on my own without the help of my classmates. Another form of assisted reading is what I would call a pre-recorded reading or audio assisted reading. And of course, that's where students read something and they hear it read back to them at the same time, but it's pre-recorded. One of the original studies was done by Carol Chomsky years ago. and had one of the best titles ever. After decoding, then what? She was an interventionist in Boston teaching kids who were struggling reading, third and fourth graders. And what she taught them was phonics. And they got to the point where they're pretty good at decoding words, but they weren't making progress. And hence the name of the article. Then what do I do? And her answer was fluency, assisted reading. What she would do is would find short text for kids to read, and she would record them on a cassette player. She would give the kids the book and the cassette and say, "Go practice this while listening to it while listening to the recording, and come back to me when you can read it on your own." So the kids would go back and practice reading and listening, reading and listening, reading and listening. And what she found was that kids would more than double their progress in reading achievement by doing this. If I'm not mistaken, they did this for a little less than 4 months' time, 20 minutes per day. And the gains that they made was over 8 months' progress. And keep in mind, these were kids who were struggling to begin with. So these are kids who previously were making less than a month's progress in instruction and reading, in reading for 1 month of instruction. So that's pretty dramatic. And I could talk about this for a while, but I can tell you that there's several studies have come after Chomsky's study, and they've all found the same remarkable results there. And not just in reading fluency, by the way, reading faster with more expression, but with reading comprehension, because fluency is that bridge. One last form of assisted reading, which I really love, is caption television, captioning. And that happens, of course, when you watch something on a screen and you see the words below, so you're hearing the words and you're seeing the words at the same time. Now, it may not be the best reading in the world, but it is reading, and it costs nothing for parents or teachers to turn on the captioning feature whenever you have the kids watch a TV program. I particularly like it with my grandkids when they watch Cocomelon. You can have the captions are on almost immediately, and they're singing those old songs that they find on Cocomelon, but they're also seeing the words. And you can almost see them beginning to gradually move their under five, move into that world of literacy. So assisted reading is number two. Number three and four I put together, and that's practice, the tools. But there's two kinds of practice that we talk about. Wide reading, well, that's the kind of reading we do as adults. You read something, and when you're done reading it, you might think about it, talk about it with a friend, and you move on to the next piece, and then the next piece, and the next piece. And we do a lot of that in school. You read a story, you talk about it with your classmates, and then you move on to the next story, and so on. So we need to encourage that. And again, work by Anne Miguel Franson and Dick Allington has shown there's evidence that supports this for improving overall reading achievement. But then there's this other kind of practice I like to call it deep reading. So wide reading and deep reading, but perhaps the more technical name is repeated reading. That's where students read something multiple times. This goes back to the work of Dr. Jay Samuels, who I would probably call the real guru of fluency. What he found working with struggling readers was that when he would ask them to read something once, twice, three, or four times, they of course got better on that piece they practiced. You'd expect that, right? But it's that carryover effect. When they went on to something brand new, they've never seen it before. In fact, a text that might even be more challenging than the one they just practiced, there's still vestiges of improvement there. This has been shown over and over again, the generative effect of repeated reading, where kids, the learning carries over from one text to the next. Work by, many of you know the work of John Hattie. He's big into determining effect size, the impact of instruction in different areas of reading instruction. And what he found was the of effect size of zero point 0.7, I believe, when it came to repeated readings. And zero point 0.7 is quite large. Others meta-analysis have found even larger effect sizes for repeated reading, not only in elementary grades but secondary as well. And I'm going to come back to repeated readings in just a second here. But I want to talk about the last one, which is phrasing. If you think about somebody who's a fluent reader, it's somebody who reads in chunks. They read in phrases, noun phrases, verb phrases, prepositional phrases. Struggling readers, on the other hand, they read in that word by word manner. So anything that we can do to help kids read in chunks, where that meaning really lies. My mom and dad under the tent, near the car, and so on. That's where meaning lies. I often ask my teachers that I chat with, what do words like the, if, of mean? The prepositions and noun markers. They don't mean anything unless they're part of a phrase. So how can we help kids read in chunks? And one way is really quite simple. I take a text and you make a copy of it, maybe a paragraph or two for your students, and then get out your pencil or pen and put in slash marks where you think the phrase boundaries are for students. A single slash within a sentence and a double slash between sentences, and then make a copy for every student. So a paragraph or two, and then what you do is you read it to your students, highlighting those phrase boundaries that you marked for them, and really trust yourself. Teachers, we really have a good sense for phrasing a text. And then when I did this with students, the next step is we read it together, chorally, emphasizing the phrase boundaries. And then they asked my students to read on their own. So it's a little 10-minute lesson here, even less than that. The very next day, I give them the same text to read, but this time without those phrase markings. Because what I want them to do is take that knowledge that they developed with the phrased cued text and apply it to unphrased, uncued text. So they begin to see how things phrase out in more conventional forms. And we have found this to be in our reading clinic a real godsend for our students. These kids who get locked into that word by word reading, it's hard to get them out of it. And this is one way to do that. So those are the 5 tools: modeling, fluent reading, assisted reading, wide reading, deep reading, and phrasing. Now, let me go back to one here, this notion of repeated reading, because it's so powerful. I think of all the fluency tools, it's probably the one that has the greatest impact. Now, the question is, though, how do you get kids into reading something repeatedly? Read this 6 times, tell me when you're done. Uh, you're going to have kids rolling their eyes at you. And this is where the art comes in. The science tells us repeated readings works, but the art is, how do you do this? And my answer is performance. If you're going to perform something for an audience, maybe a song lyric, a poem, a script, you're going to rehearse it, right? And rehearsal is repeated readings, but in an artful form. You're not reading something repeatedly to try to read it as fast as you can. You're reading it to develop that prosodic expression and to read automatically. So this is the artful part, and this is where reader's theater comes in. Reader's theater is basically a performance of a text. It could be a script. In fact, most of us think of it as a short script, but it could be a poem, a song lyric. It could be a dialogue, a monologue, maybe a speech from American history, and have kids practice that and then perform it for the audience. Um, the weekly routine is really quite simple. On Monday, if you were doing, say, a poem, let's say we're performing poetry by David L. Harrison, the great poet from the state of Missouri. And what I would do is I would find 3 or 4 poems by David and make copies and pass them out to my students. On Monday, what I would do is I would model that text for my students, read it out loud. And on Tuesday, we would read it chorally. Wednesday, I would ask students to uh, practice on their own. Thursday, for a little 10 minutes. And then Thursday, we'd have a dress rehearsal. And Friday, we would have a poetry slam where we'd celebrate the great poetry of David L. Harrison. Next week, we would do it all again. This little weekly routine that is very authentic and artful, as well as scientific, has been shown to make remarkable results, not just in fluency, but more recently, well, at least more recently described by people such as Chase Young, Nell Duke, and many others. They're crossing that bridge in an artful way, artful and scientific way to comprehension. So, reader's theater is one of the most unsung elements of the reading curriculum. We often push it off to the side because we say, to have that so much fun in reading instruction, that can't be very instructional. And yet, what we know is it's probably one of the most important things that we can do for our students here. One of my favorite studies came out years ago, and the title was "I Never Thought I Could Be a Star: A Reader's Theater Ticket to Reading Fluency," and it was about second graders in a classroom in Texas who found that they were struggling readers, but when they were given that opportunity to rehearse and perform, they could be as good a reader as anybody else in a class. Hence, they were the star that they never thought they could be. So, readers theater is a great way to develop fluency, and you can see how we can do a science in both science of reading style and art of reading style as well.
Okay,
Okay, I talk a
that.
long time
Oh
now.
no, no, no. Hey, it's your interview. But there, I want to do one important clarification, and then ask you. This is going to be an easy question. Okay, the clarification is, um, and I can remember the day you first showed us this chart where each time
Oh yeah,
they remember more and more and more, but it isn't just the words in that phrase. Their overall
you're
uh,
right.
ability is. And could you just say that once? I know Chase has made this point a number of times on his kinds of presentations. I think some people think, oh gosh, repeated reading, they're going to learn 10 sight words. That's no big deal. But
Right.
tell us about the big deal.
Yeah, it's that generative effect. When I move on to something brand new, a text I've never seen before, there's improvement there. And it's on words text I've never seen before, words I've never seen before. There's this generative effect. And I think part of it is this. When you practice something multiple times, you get good at it, you develop that sense of confidence. Hey, I can read this as well as anybody in my class. And that carries over to the next text as well there. And again, this has been shown over and over and over again at almost every grade level. So, one of my favorite stories is, uh, uh, oh gosh, who played Fonzie in Happy Days? Uh, oh,
Henry Winkler?
Henry Winkler. Well, I heard him speak once, and he talked about, being a famous actor. But he said growing up he was dyslexic. He was identified as dyslexic, and he said, as I understand it right, it was not until he got into middle school or junior high school he got started getting into theater and performing, and he found that when he could practice something for a play, uh, you know, that not only helped him, with the confidence of performing in that play he may have been in, but also improving his reading. And that's what he attributed to it. And I've actually had one of my doctoral students do a study on that. There's a whole collection people in the arts in performing arts who have been identified as having difficulty in reading and use that notion of rehearsal as the vehicle to get them into proficient reading. So
Okay,
yeah,
I've got a softball question for you now. So my teachers and administrators have been listening to you and going, "Oh my God, all that stuff you've got to get together, all that planning you've got to do. How am I ever going to have time?" Would there happen to be a resource where all that stuff is all in one place? Uh, is there any such book like that?
that is a softball, isn't it? Well, yeah, the book is called The Fluency Development Lesson, and this is where I mentioned David L. Harrison. David, myself, and Dr. Lynn Coolidge put together. Um, Actually, it's an intervention program for students in the elementary grades, every grade level. And let me just go through this fluency development lesson with you very quickly here. In fact, I know you're going to have Julia on, Julia Armstrong, and she's going to talk about it in more detail. But it's a simple lesson where the goal is for students to learn to read something well every day in about 20 minutes. What can you learn to read well? Well, a poem, right? Not terribly long. And we go through the process of that I just described to you, where we give kids a poem, a text, and that's their goal is to learn to read it. How do you learn to read it? Well, we start by the teacher reading it to the students once, twice, three times. Then we read it together chorally once, twice, three times. The students then perhaps practice with a partner a couple times, and at that point, they're able to read that text because they read it, six, seven, eight, nine times. So we ask them to perform. Now, in our reading clinic, what we would do is we would have parents sitting outside the classroom, and the teacher, the clinician, would send the students out to perform for that parent. And all that parent had to do was sit, listen, make a big fuss over the children, give them a hug and a sticker, and send them back there. But again, that feeling of success there. And then we added one other thing, and this is where one of the things I worry about with kids practicing a text is that they memorize it. And if you memorize it, you don't have to look at the words. And if you don't look at the words, you're not reading. So after the kids perform, we also do a word study component where the students actually take some of the words from that text they were learning that day and doing some instructional activities, maybe looking at word families, maybe doing some word sorts, maybe doing a word ladder. In fact, in this fluency development lesson book that we just mentioned, for every lesson, I was given the task of creating a word ladder for every one of the lessons. So that is already there in the book itself. So it's a complete approach to providing intervention and instruction for kids at a variety of levels. And I might add, we have one of the best poets in the world, in David L. Harrison. You're good friends with him, um, um, and Sam, and he's the poet laureate of the state of Missouri, and also I learned out recently he's the poet laureate for Route 66, with that great highway that runs through the country. So I hope I'm not. I hope I'm not over pitching my book, but it's really one that's worth taking a look at. The Fluency Development Lesson, Lynn Coolidge, Tim Rasinski, and David L. Harrison.
Okay, I'm going to
And I
mention that.
might add, I'm
Oh,
sorry to
oh, sure.
interrupt,
Go,
but
go, go.
Julia Armstrong, who is the second half of our presentation, um, attended the Maryland Reading Conference a couple years ago where I actually presented it. And she decided to try it out with her students. And I'm not going to give it away, but what she found with her intervention students was really quite amazing. So I'm kind of setting the stage for Julia right there.
Right, and that's exactly what we did when we did this live the first time. And that interview, by the way, is already done, and it will be available immediately after this one. So the thing I really want to stress here is that for, gosh, I don't know, under $40, the teacher can get all the lessons, all the poems. And besides poems, David also did some other things that
Right,
do content area things, and everything they need
right.
to pull this off, and they have the copyright for all of it. So the only cost would be the cost of running it off for their particular classroom. And uh, so I think that this is just an amazing resource. And I don't want to steal Julia's thunder either. So we'll pick that up from there. And all links to all this will be in the blog. But I will quickly mention that we had at the Julia's part of the presentation, every person there got three books from one of the Reader's Theater, and one person at each table, one lucky person, actually got to take the fluency a copy of the fluency
Great.
lesson plan home. But the thing is, everything you need to do this at multiple grade levels is all there, and that just blows my mind. Okay.
Great. Mine too. I don't know how we did it. So,
uh,
yeah. I might throw out a thanks to the Benchmark Education Company, who published the Fluency Development Lesson and is also one of the main publishers when it comes to Reader's Theater programs for elementary grade students.
yeah, and again, not stealing Julia's thunder, but she'll talk about that. And so
Sounds good.
now we reach that point where I say, did I leave anything out? Is there anything more you want to say before we close this up?
Uh, no, I think I've run my mouth as long as I should. It's time to
Oh,
go
we
visit my
love it
grandson.
when you run your mouth. Absolutely. Okay, so there's one last little silly tradition in a Bomarito interview, and that is the Zoom wave goodbye. So we're going to both try to put on our biggest smiles and wave. And that's a wrap. Thank you so much,
Right.
Tim.
Thank you, Sam, and thanks to all the teachers and school administrators out there listening. We appreciate your work so much.